longer and longer, about 70 years, any timeline from U.S.
So
from today?
I think it would be incredibly foolish of me to try to give a timeline for that from here. I will say we are in the middle of a military campaign right now. The Secretary has laid out some principles that he thinks ought to be adhered to at the end of that conflict as it relates to a path forward. And one of the principles he has said is that we need to get back on a path to the establishment of an independent Palestinian state. Go ahead.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Yes.
Yeah.
Regarding the future of Gaza, during the transition period, PA is not ready to manage the situation in Gaza. Why don't elections be held and the Palestinian people decide by themselves who will represent them and who will rule them?
So we, of course, support elections we support elections for the Palestinian people to decide their leadership, as we do for people around the world. We're in the middle of a conflict right now. You obviously can't have elections in the middle of a conflict where people have a difficulty even moving around to get access to food and water and medicine, let alone exercise their right to vote. But of course, as part of a transition moving forward, we do support elections as we do everywhere in the world.
But
Go ahead.
Thank you. Mark Stone from Sky News. Following on from what my colleague said just now about the two-state solution, the Israeli ambassador to the UK made quite clear yesterday to Sky News when we spoke to her that the answer is absolutely no to a two-state solution. She echoed remarks the day before by, I think, the Israeli communications minister, who said, "We live here, this is our country, there will be no Palestinian state here. We will never allow another state to be established between the Jordan and the sea." It seems pretty clear to me, and I'm keen for your view, that the ambassador's remarks now put Israel in open defiance of American presidents' policies going back 40 years. How do you square what you just said there at the podium with what the current Israeli government is making quite clear, no two states?
So we have seen a number of different statements from different officials inside the Israeli government with respect to two states. We are going to continue to be clear about what our policy is and what we think is the appropriate policy going forward. And I say this as an appropriate policy, not just in the interests of the Palestinian people, but in the interests of the Israeli people and in the interests of the long-term stability and security of Israel. I spoke to this a little bit yesterday. The October 7th attack should have been a wake-up call to everyone that the status quo that has existed for a number of years is just not in the interest of Israel, that there needs to be a solution moving forward that addresses the legitimate aspirations of the Palestinian people while providing security to the Israeli people. We think the best way to achieve that is the establishment of an independent Palestinian state. We have made that quite clear. We make that clear privately, we make that clear publicly, and it's something we'll continue to engage with the Israeli government about.
If I may follow up briefly, the logical conclusion to what we're seeing unfold at the moment seems to be that you are backing Israel militarily with weapons, with funding, despite two starkly different endpoints.
So I don't think you can draw that conclusion at this point. We are supporting Israel in its campaign to ensure that the October 7th attacks cannot be repeated. But that doesn't mean we don't have disagreements with them along the way. We're a sovereign country. They're a sovereign country. We don't see eye to eye on everything. There are very few countries, maybe no countries in the world, where we are in complete agreement with everything. One of the things that you have heard the president say is that we have a long-standing relationship with Israel where we are close friends. And as close friends, we can have very frank and candid and sometimes quite difficult conversations. And we will continue to do so about this subject and I'm sure a great many others. Yeah, Leon, go ahead.
Yeah, I have a question on Hong Kong. The Hong Kong authorities and police have issued bounties up to £1 million, I think, against 5 activists, including one which I think has asylum here in the United States. What is your reaction to that?
So we strongly condemn the egregious actions taken by Hong Kong authorities in announcing national security law changes and a new bounty list targeting democracy advocates overseas. That shows blatant disregard for international norms, for democracy and human rights. We deplore any attempt to apply the Beijing-imposed national security law extraterritorially, and reiterate that Hong Kong authorities have no jurisdiction within United States borders, where the advocates for democracy and freedom will continue to enjoy their constitutionally guaranteed freedoms and rights. And we deplore any attempt to apply the national security law extraterritorially, and will remain committed to defending the rights and freedoms of our citizens, and call on the PRC to act in accordance with its international commitments and legal obligations.
Can you just explain to us how you see these bounties, quote unquote bounties, as being different than the Rewards for Justice program?
So I will say that the Reward for Justice program is not used to target democracy advocates and people that are advocating for democracy and exercising constitutionally protected rights. That is the ultimate difference.
Well, but it is used for, in addition to wanted terrorists, it is used for people who you guys think have violated U.S. law for things, for alleged crimes that fall short of murder, like cyber hacking and things
Correct.
like that. So it's okay for the U.S. to apply its laws extraterrestrially or territorially.
Now who's misspeaking?
Exactly. It's okay for you guys to apply your law extraterritorially to, put out bounties, rewards for information leading to the arrest of these people, but it's not okay for other governments to do
So I will say that we use our full range of criminal justice programs, including rewards for the apprehension of individuals who have violated our law, in keeping with what are long-standing recognized crimes, not for what we believe are fundamental human rights: freedom of speech, freedom of expression, supporting democracy. Go ahead. I'll come to you next, Michelle. Alex, go ahead.
How's the situation with Sweden, Matt? Because there are reports that the Foreign Minister of Turkey told Secretary Blinken last Friday that Turkey is not ready to approve the membership of Sweden to NATO. Do you have anything new to tell us?
I will say that we continue to make clear to the Turkish government that we think Sweden's NATO accession should be approved as soon as possible. It's long overdue. Sweden is ready to take its place in NATO, and we will continue to engage in conversations with the Turkish government to push them to approve that accession as soon as possible. Michelle.
Yeah, are you talking to the Lebanese and the Israeli governments regarding the situation on the border, and what's your assessment of the situation there?
So we do continue to make clear to not just to those two governments, but of course everyone in the region, that one of our top priorities moving forward is to keep this conflict from expanding, including from expanding to the north of Israel. That is one of our top priorities. You've heard the Secretary talk about this in the past. I don't want to make any assessment other than that you have, of course, seen strikes back and forth, cross-border strikes between Israel and Hezbollah, and we do want to see this eventually resolved without further escalation. Alex.
Thanks, Matt. Going back to Azerbaijan, I want to get your reaction to ongoing media crackdown with the arrest of leading journalist Hafiz Babalı and concerns about potential spillover as they're going after opposition leaders as well.
So the recent trend of detaining journalists is deeply troubling, and we continue to urge the Azerbaijani government to respect the human rights and fundamental freedoms of everyone, including those exercising freedom of expression.
Has this topic been discussed recently during the engagement with the Azerbaijani government?
I'm not going to speak to any specific engagement, but yes, we have raised this on a number of occasions with them.
Thanks so much.
Brian, go ahead.
Question on Cuba. At the end of the Trump administration, they designated Cuba as a state sponsor of terror. Last week, in a briefing with Congress, the State Department told members of Congress that they have not even begun a review of whether Cuba should be removed from the state sponsor of terror list. As you know, there's been 450,000 migrants that have flown out of Cuba over the last 2 years. The economy has been decimated as a result of the designation. Why hasn't the review begun?
So I'm not going to speak to either an internal deliberative process here inside the State Department or our conversations with members of Congress, though they, of course, are I'm in the middle of answering someone else's question right now. You might maybe hold for just a second. as we have said previously, should there be any rescission of the state sponsor of terrorism status, it would need to be consistent with a specific statutory criteria for rescinding that determination. Any review of Cuba's status on the list, should one ever happen, would be based on the law and the criteria established by Congress. But the President and Secretary Blinken remain committed to the policies that we have advanced that will advance the democratic aspirations of the Cuban.
But there's a 6-month statutory requirement, as you know. Is the administration nervous that you will run out of time in this term in order to make a decision if you haven't started the review yet?
So again, I don't think I can answer that with violating what I said I wasn't going to do at the outset, which is comment on internal deliberations. So go ahead. Question.
Thank you, Matthew. In a congressional hearing yesterday, multiple victims shared about violence they experienced during the APEC summit in San Francisco, believed to be orchestrated by agents of the CCP. One person had bruises and cuts around his eyes and lips. How concerned is the U.S. about such possibly state-sanctioned violence, and what measures do you think can be used to protect Chinese dissident groups? And then I have another question.
So we are always concerned about acts of violence. We support freedom of speech in the United States. When we see acts of violence, we make quite clear to other governments that they're inappropriate. And beyond that, I would refer with respect to these specific reports to local law enforcement.
And on the issue of transnational repression, would the State Department support a measure to cancel student visas of those who spy on their fellow Chinese students, critical of the CCP, which was brought up in yesterday's hearing?
Again, we'd have to see the specific details of it and examine it. I'm not in a position to do so here.
Thank you.
Thank you. Hungarian Foreign Minister Peter Szijjártó recently said that during their meetings in Brussels, NATO foreign ministers admitted that Ukraine's counteroffensive had failed. Do you share this view?
No, we do not. And I was at those meetings of the foreign ministers in Brussels, and what I heard, and you heard some of them say this publicly when they came out and talked, was an assessment that Ukraine has continued to achieve successes in the battlefield. Those successes include wiping out a great deal of Russia's Black Sea fleet and reopening a channel for grain to be exported from Ukraine, something that the Russian government had tried very hard to block. So no, I do not share that assessment.
One more?
Yeah, one more, go ahead.
And you just said that Russian economy is crippling because of the sanctions and so on and so on. And at the same time, Bloomberg recently reported that Russia will end this year with a surplus of 75 billion, while the United States economy will add 2 trillion in deficit. Do you really believe that Russian economy is crippling now?
So that is not the only way to judge the relative health of the economy, and I think you look at the relative health of our economy and Russia's. My colleagues at the Treasury Department should really speak to that, but I think it's not a comparison the Russian government would like. And yes, we have seen the Russian government or the Russian economy crippled across a number of different sectors as a result of the sanctions and the export controls that we have imposed. Does that mean that it's time to step back and abandon Ukraine because they're ready to move forward on their own? No, it means we need to stay the course and continue to supporting them, because despite the effect that our sanctions and export controls have had on the Russian economy, President Putin has chosen that he will continue to use everything at his disposal to fund the Russian war machine. We'll continue to send Russian soldiers to their deaths, their tragic deaths in Ukraine. And so it means, from our perspective, that we need to stay committed, and we hope the United States Congress will be there. Go ahead.
The European Union Council President announced that the EU has agreed to open accession negotiations with Ukraine and Moldova. Can you give us your reaction to that?
So I'm not going to comment specifically because that is a decision for the EU and its member states to make, but we do broadly support countries in Ukraine and other countries' European aspirations. And I think we'll end there. Thanks, everyone.
Oh, wait.
You have
I have one more. This is far afield on Cambodia. Yesterday, a bunch of senators and members and House members sent a letter to the Secretary about political prisoners in Cambodia, and in particular raised the case of Terry Seng, who I've asked about in here before. Has there been any progress made on whether she will be declared wrongfully detained?
There has not.
So
still a case that's under review.
Okay.
But we do continue to urge her release.
And And then in the meantime, do you have any specific reaction to this letter that was sent about, which included not just her, but others?
No, I've seen the reports of it, but I haven't reviewed it in detail or discussed it with anyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you.